Welcome to the Darkest Page podcast. Tonight's tale is Laura Silver Bell by Joseph Sheridan Lafanu. In the 5 Northumbrian counties you will scarcely find so bleak, ugly, and yet, in a savage way, so picturesque a moor as Dardale Moss. The moor itself spreads north, south, east, and west, a great, undulating sea of black peat and heath. What we may term its shores are wooded wildly with birch, hazel, and dwarf oak. No towering mountains surround it, but here and there you have a rocky knoll rising among the trees, and many a wooded promontory of the same pretty, wild forest running out into its dark level. Habitations are thinly scattered in this barren territory, and a full mile away from the meanest was the stone cottage of Mother Carke. Let not my southern reader who associates ideas of comfort with the term cottage mistake. This thing is built of shingle, with low walls. Its thatch is hollow. The peat smoke curls stingily from its stunted chimney. It is worthy of its savage surroundings. The primitive neighbours remark that no rowan tree grows near, nor holly, nor bracken, and no horseshoe is nailed on the door. Not far from the birches and hazels that straggle about the rude wall of the little enclosure, on the contrary, they say you may discover the broom and the ragwort, in which witches mysteriously delight. But this is perhaps a scandal. Moll Clarke was for many a year the sage femme of the wild domain. She has renounced practice, however, for some years, and now, under the rose, she dabbles, it is thought, in the black art, in which she has always been secretly skilled, tells fortunes, practices charms, and in popular esteem is little better than a witch. Mother Carke has been away to the town of Willarden to sell knit stockings, and is returning to her rude dwelling by Dardale Moss. To her right, as far away as the eye can reach, the moor stretches. The narrow track she has followed here tops a gentle upland, and at her left a sort of jungle of dwarf oak and brushwood approaches its edge. The sun is sinking blood-red in the west. His disk has touched the broad black level of the moor, and his parting beams glare athwart the gaunt figure of the old beldame, as she strides homeward, stick in hand, and bring into relief the folds of her mantle, which gleam like the draperies of a bronze image in the light of a fire. For a few moments this light floods the air tree, gorse, rock, and bracken glare, and then it is out, and grey twilight over everything. All is still and sombre. At this hour the simple traffic of the thinly populated country is over, and nothing can be more solitary. From this jungle, nevertheless, through which the mists of evening are already creeping, she sees a gigantic man approaching her. In that poor and primitive country, robbery is a crime unknown. She therefore has no fears for her pound of tea and pint of gin and 16 shillings in silver which she is bringing home in her pocket. But there is something that would have frightened another woman about this man. He is gaunt, sombre, bony, dirty, and dressed in a black suit which a beggar would hardly care to pick out of the dust. This ill-looking man nodded to her as he stepped onto the road. "I don't know you," she said. He nodded again. "I never said you near," she exclaimed sternly. "Fine evening, Mother Carke," he says, and holds his snuff-box towards her. She widened the distance between them by a step or so, and said again sternly and pale, "I have nought to say to thee, whoever thou beest." "You know Laura Silver Bell?" "That's a by Niam. The lass's Niam is Laura Lou," she answered, looking straight before her. "One name's as good as another for one that was never christened, mother." "How know ye that?" she asks grimly, for it is a received opinion in that part of the world that the fairies have power over those who have never been baptized. The stranger turned on her a malignant smile. "There is a young lord in love with her," the stranger says, "and I am that lord. Have her at your house tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, and you must stick cross pins through the candle, as you have done for many a one before, to bring her lover hither by 10, and her fortunes made. And take this for your trouble." He extended his long finger and thumb toward her with a guinea temptingly displayed. "I have nought to do with thee. I never sid thee afore. Get thee awa. I earn nae gold o'er thee, and I'll take none. Away with thee, or I'll find and that will mark thee." The old woman had stopped and was quivering in every limb as she thus spoke. He looked very angry. Sulkily he turned away at her words and strode slowly towards the wood from which he had come, and as he approached it, he seemed to her to grow taller and stalked into it as high as a tree. Old Farmer Lou was one of that sect who insisted that baptism shall be but once administered, and not until the Christian candidate had attained to adult years. The girl had indeed for some time been of an age not only, according to this theory, to be baptized, but if need be, to be married. Her story was a sad little romance. A lady some 17 years before had come down and paid Farmer Lou for 2 rooms in his house. She told him that her husband would follow her in a fortnight, and that he was in the meantime delayed by business in Liverpool. In 10 days after her arrival, her baby was born, Moll Cark acting as sage femme on the occasion, and on the evening of that day the poor young mother died. No husband came. No wedding ring, they said, was on her finger. About £50 was found in her desk, which Farmer Lou, who was a kind old fellow and had lost his 2 children, put in bank for the little girl, and resolved to keep her until a rightful owner should step forward to claim her. They found a half-dozen love letters signed Francis, and calling the dead woman Laura. So Farmer Lou called the little girl Laura, and her sobriquet of Silver Bell was derived from a tiny silver bell, once gilt, which was found among her poor mother's little treasures after her death, and which the child wore on a ribbon round her neck. Thus, being very pretty and merry, she grew up as a North Country farmer's daughter, and the old man, as she needed more looking after, grew older and less able to take care of her, so she was in fact very nearly her own mistress, and did pretty much in all things as she liked. Old Moll Cark, by some caprice for which no one could account, cherished an affection for the girl, who saw her often and paid her many a small fee in exchange for the secret indications of the future. It was too late when Mother Cark reached her home to look for a visit from Laura Silverbell that day. About 3 o'clock next afternoon, Mother Cark was sitting knitting with her glasses on outside her door on the stone bench when she saw the pretty girl mount lightly to the top of the stile at her left under the birch, against the silver stem of which she leaned her slender hand, and call, "Moll! Moll! Moll! Mother Cark! Are ye alone all by yoursel?" "Aye, Laura lass, we can be class enoo if you want a word with me," says the old woman, rising with a mysterious nod and beckoning her stiffly with her long fingers. The girl was assuredly pretty enough for a lord to fall in love with. Only look at her, a profusion of brown rippling hair parted low in the middle of her forehead, almost touching her eyebrows, and made the pretty oval of her face, by the breadth of that rich line, more marked. What a pretty little nose! What scarlet lips and large, dark, long-fringed eyes! Her face is transparently tinged with those clear Murillo tints which appear in deeper dyes on her wrists and the backs of her hands. These are the beautiful gypsy tints with which the sun dyes young skins so richly. The old woman eyes all this, and her pretty figure so round and slender, and her shapely little feet, cased in the thick shoes that can't hide their comely proportions, as she stands on top of the stile, but it is with a dark and saturnine aspect. "Come, lass, what stand ye for top to wall, where folk may chance to see thee? I have a thing to tell thee, lass." She beckoned her again. "And I have a thing to tell thee, Moll." "Come hither," said the old woman peremptorily. "But ye munna give me the creepins," make me tremble. I want to look into the glass of water, mind you. The old woman smiled grimly and changed her tone. Now, honey, get thee down, and let me see that canny face. And she beckoned her again. Laura Silver Bell did get down, and stepped lightly toward the door of the old woman's dwelling. "Tak this," said the girl, unfolding a piece of bacon from her apron, "and I have a silver sixpence to give thee when I get away hame." They entered the dark kitchen of the cottage, and the old woman stood by the door, lest their conference should be lighted on by surprise. "Afore ye begin," said Mother Carke, I softened her patois, "I mun tell ye there's ill folk watching ye. What's old Farmer Lou about? He doesna get to, sir," the clergyman, "to baptise thee. If you let Sunday next pass, I'm afeard you'll never be sprinkled nor signed wi' cross while there's a sky aboon us." "Goy!" explains the girl, "who's looking after me?" "A big black feller, as high as the Kipples, come out o' woods near Deadman's Creek, just after sun go down yester evening. I knew well what he was, for his feet ne'er touched road while he made as if he walked beside me, and he wanted to give me snuff first, and I wouldn't have that, and then he offered me a golden guinea, but I was no sick away, and to bring you here to-night and cross the candle with pins to call your lover in, and he said he's a great lord and in love with thee." "And you refused him?" "Well, for thee I did, lass," says Mother Carke. "Why, it's every word true," cries the girl vehemently, starting to her feet, for she had seated herself on the great oak chest. "True, lass? Come, say what you mean," demanded Mal Carke, with a dark and searching gaze. "Last night I was coming home from the work with old Farmer Dykes and his wife and his daughter Nell, and when we came to the stile I bid them good night and we parted." "And you came by path alone in night time, did ye?" exclaimed old Mal Carke sternly. "I wasna feared. I don't know why. The path home leads down by the wise old Haworth Castle. I know it well. And a dowdy path it is. You'll keep indoors o' nights for a while, or you'll rue it. What saw ye?" "No fretting, mother, now I was feared on." "You heard a voice calling your name?" "I heard nowt that was doubt, but the hully who in the hard castle was," answered the pretty girl. "I heard nor said nowt that's doubt, but mickle that's conny and gladsome. I heard singing and laughing a long way off. I consated, and stopped a bit to listen. Then I walked on a step or two, and there, sure enough, in the pie-mag field, under the castle wall, not 20 steps away, I saw a grand company, silks and satins, and men with velvet coats, with gold lace striped over them, and ladies with necklaces that would dazzle ye, and fans as big as griddles, and powdered footmen like what the shearer had behind his coach, only these was 10 times as grand." "It was a full moon last night," said the old woman. "So bright 'twould blink you to look at it," said the girl. "Never an ill sight but the deedful finds a light," quoth the old woman. "There's a rinning brook there. You were at its side, and they at that. Did they try and make you cross over?" "Goy, didn't they? Now but civility and kindness, though. But you mun let me tell it my own way. They were talking and laughing and eating and drinking out of long glasses and gold cups, seated on the grass, and music was playing, and I kecking behind the bush at all the grand doings, and up they gits to dance, and says a tall feller I didna see afore, 'You mun step across and dance wi' a young lord that's fain in love with thee, and thee's myself.' And sure you know I kecked at him under my lashes, and a conny lad he is to my taste, though he be dressed in black with sword and sash, velvet twice as fine as they sells at the shop at Gowden Friars, and kecking at me again fra out corners of his eye, and the same feller tell't me he was mad in love with me. And his fadder was there, and his sister, and they came all the way from Catstean Castle to see me that night, and that's t'other side up Gowden Friars." "Come, lass, you know Mafflin, tell me true. What was he like? Was his face grimmed with soot? A tall fellow with wide shoulders, and looked like a ill thing with black clothes amidst his rags?" "His face was long, but well fared, and darker nor a gipsy, and his clothes were black and grand and made of velvet, and he said he was the young lord himself, and he looked like it." "That will be the same feller I saw at Deadman's Grike," said Moll Carke, with an anxious frown. "Hoot, mudder, who could that be?" cried the lass, with a toss of her pretty head and a smile of scorn. But the fortune-teller made no answer, and the girl went on with her story. "When they began to dance," continued Laura Silver Bell, "he urged me again, but I wouldna step over. 'Twas partly pride, 'cause I wanna dress fine enough, and partly contrariness, or something, but gar I wouldna, not a foot. No, but I more nor half wished it at the time. Well, for thee, thou dost cross the brook. Hoity-toity, why not? Keep ye at home after nightfall, and don't ye be walking by yoursel by daylight, or any light lang lonesome ways, till after you're baptized, said Moll Clark. I'm like to be married first. Take care that marriage won't hang ill bell ropes, said Mother Clark. Leave me alone for that. The young lord said he was maist daft with love of me. He wanted to give me a conny ring with a beautiful stone in it, but drat it, I was sick and hoppy I wouldn't take it, and he a young lord. Lord, indeed! Are you daft or dreaming? These fine folk, what were they? I'll tell you. Dobbies and fairies, and if you don't do as you bid, they'll take ye, and you'll never get out of their hands again while grass grows, said the old woman grimly. All right it, replies the girl impatiently. Who's daft a dreaming now? I'd have been dead with fear if 'twas any such thing. It couldn't be. All was so lovesome and bonny and shapely. Well, and what do you want of me, lass? Asked the old woman sharply. I want to know, here's sixpence, what I said do, said the young lass. 'Twould be a pity to lose such a morrow, eh? Say your prayers, lass, I can't help ye, says the old woman darkly. If you go with people, you'll never come back. You munna talk with them, nor eat with 'em, nor drink with 'em, nor take a pin's worth by way of gift from 'em. Mark well what I say, or you're lost. The girl looked down, plainly much vexed. The old woman stared at her with a mysterious frown steadily for a few seconds. Tell me, lass, and tell me true, are ye in love with the lad? What for, said I, said the girl, with a careless toss of her head, and blushing up to her very temples. I see how it is, said the old woman, with a groan, and repeated the words sadly thinking, and walked out of the door a step or two, and looked jealously round. The lass is witched. Did you see him since? Asked Mother Cark, returning. The girl was still embarrassed, and now she spoke in a lower tone and seemed subdued. I thought I said him as I came here walking beside me among the trees, but I can't say it was only the trees themselves that looked like him, one behind another as I walked on. I can tell thee nowt, lass, but what I tell ye afore, answered the old woman peremptorily. Get ye hame and don't delay on the way, and say your prayers as ye gar, and let none but good thoughts come nigh ye, and put na foot outside the door staying again till ye gae to be christened, and get that done on Sunday next. And with this charge, given with grisly earnestness, she saw her over the sty, and stood upon it, watched her retreat, until the trees quite hid her and her path from view. The sky grew cloudy and thunderous, and the air darkened rapidly as the girl, a little frightened by Mal Cark's view of the case, walked homeward by the lonely path among the trees. A black cat which had walked close by her, for these creatures sometimes take a ramble in search of their prey among the woods and thickets, crept from under the hollow of an oak, and was again with her. It seemed to her to grow bigger and bigger as the darkness deepened, and its green eyes glared as large as halfpennies in her frightened vision as the thunder came booming along the heights from the Willardon road. She tried to drive it away, but it growled and hissed awfully, and set up its back as if it would spring at her, and finally it skipped up into a tree, where they grew thickest at each side of her path, and accompanied her high overhead, hopping from bough to bough, as if meditating a pounce upon her shoulders. Her fancy being full of strange thoughts, she was frightened, and she fancied that it was haunting her steps, and destined to undergo some hideous transformation the moment she ceased to guard her path with prayers. She was frightened for a while after she got home. The dark looks of Mother Cark were always before her eyes, and a secret dread prevented her passing the threshold of her home again that night. Next day it was different. She had got rid of the awe with which Mother Cark had inspired her. She could not get the tall, dark-featured lord in the black velvet dress out of her head. He had taken her fancy. She was growing to love him. She could think of nothing else. Bessie Hennock, a neighbour's daughter, came to see her that day, and proposed a walk towards the ruins of Harworth Castle to gather blaeberries. so off the two girls went together. In the thicket along the slopes near the ivied walls of Haworth Castle, the companions began to fill their baskets. Hours passed, the sun was sinking near the west, and Laura Silverbell had not come home. Over the hatch of the farmhouse door the maids leant ever and anon with outstretched necks, watching for a sign of the girl's return, and wondering, as the shadows lengthened, what had become of her. At last, just as the rosy sunset gilding began to overspread the landscape, Bessie Hennock, weeping into her apron, made her appearance without her companion. Her account of their adventures was curious. I will relate the substance of it more connectedly than her agitation would allow her to give it, and without the disguise of the rude Northumbrian dialect. The girl said that as they got along together among the brambles that grow beside the brook that bounds the Pie Mag field, she on a sudden saw a very tall, big-boned man with an ill-favoured, smirched face, and dressed in worn and rusty black, standing at the other side of a little stream. She was frightened, and while looking at this dirty, wicked, starved figure, Laura Silverbell touched her, gazed at the same tall scarecrow, but with a countenance full of confusion and even rapture. She was peeping through the bush behind which she stood, and with a sigh, she said, "Isna that a conny lad? A guy, see his bony velvet clothes, his sword and sash. That's a lord, I can tell you, and well I know who he follows, who he loves, and who he'll wed." Bessie Hennock thought her companion daft. "See how lovesome he looks," whispered Laura. Bessie looked again and saw him gazing at her companion with a malignant smile, and at the same time he beckoned her to reproach. "Dirta, go not near him, he'll wring thy neck," gasped Bessie in great fear as she saw Laura step forward with a look of beautiful bashfulness and joy. She took the hand he stretched across the stream, more for love of the hand than any need of help, and in a moment was across and by his side, and his long arm about her waist. "Fares thee well, Bessie, I'm going my ways," she called, leaning her head to his shoulder, "and tell good Father Lou I'm going in my ways to be happy, and maybe at long last I'll see him again." And with a farewell wave of her hand she went away with her dismal partner, and Laura Silverbell was never more seen at home, or among the coppies and wickwoods, the bony fields and bosky hollows by Dardale Moss. Bessie Hennock followed them for a time. She crossed the brook, and though they seemed to move slowly enough, she was obliged to run to keep them in view, and she all the time cried to her continually, come back, Bonnie Laurie," until, getting over a bank, she was met by a white-faced old man, and so frightened she was that she thought she fainted outright. At all events, she did not come to herself until the birds were singing their vespers in the amber light of sunset, and the day was over. No trace of the direction of the girl's flight was ever discovered. Weeks and months passed, and more than a year. At the end of that time, one of Moll Clark's goats died, as she suspected, by the envious practices of a rival witch who lived at the far end of Dardale Moss. All alone in her stone cabin, the old woman had prepared her charm to ascertain the author of her misfortune. The heart of the dead animal, stuck all over with pins, was burnt in the fire, the windows, doors, and every other aperture of the house being first carefully stopped. After the heart, thus prepared with suitable incantations, is consumed in the fire, the first person who comes to the door or passes by it is the offending magician. Mother Clark completed these lonely rites at dead of night. It was a dark night with the glimmer of the stars only, and a melancholy night wind was sawing through the scattered woods that spread around. After a long and dead silence there came a heavy thump at the door, and a deep voice called her by name. She was startled, for she expected no man's voice, and peeping from the window she saw in the dim light a coach and 4 horses, with gold-laced footman and coachman in wig and cocked hat, turned out as if for a state occasion. She unbarred the door, and a tall gentleman, dressed in black, waiting at the threshold, entreated her, as the only sage femme within reach, to come in the coach and attend Lady Lairdale, who was about to give birth to a baby, promising her handsome payment. Lady Lairdale, she had never heard of her. "How far away is it?" 12 miles on the old road to Golden Friars." Her avarice is roused, and she steps into the coach. The footman clasps to the door. The glass jingles with the sounds of a laugh. The tall, dark-faced gentleman in black is seated opposite. They are driving at a furious pace. They have turned out of a road into a narrower one, dark with thicker and loftier forest than she was accustomed to. She grows anxious, for she knows every road and bypath in the country round, and she has never seen this one. He encourages her. The moon has risen above the edge of the horizon, and she sees a noble old castle. Its summit of tower, watchtower, and battlement glimmers faintly in the moonlight. This is their destination. She feels on a sudden all but overpowered by sleep, but although she nods, she is quite conscious of the continued motion, which has become even rougher. She makes an effort and rouses herself. What has become of the coach, the castle, the servants? Nothing but the strange forest remains the same. She is jolting along on a rude hurdle, seated on rushes, and a tall, big-boned man in rags sits in front, kicking with his heel the ill-favoured beast that pulls them along, every bone of which sticks out, and holding the halter which serves for reins. They stop at a door of a miserable building of loose stone, with a thatch so sunken and rotten that the roof tree and couples protrude in crooked corners, like the bones of the wretched horse, with enormous head and ears, that dragged them to the door. The long gaunt man gets down, his sinister face grimmed like his hands. It was the same grimy giant who had accosted her on the lonely road near Deadman's Grike, but she feels that she must go through with it now, and she follows him into the house. 2 rushlights were burning in the large and miserable room, and on a coarse, ragged bed lay a woman groaning piteously. "That's Lady Lairdale," said the gaunt, dark man, who then began to stride up and down the room, rolling his head, stamping furiously, and thumping one hand on the palm of the other, and talking and laughing in the corners, where there was no one visible to hear or to answer. Old Marl Clark recognised in the faded, half-starved creature who lay on the bed, as dark now and grimy as the man, and looking as if she had never in her life washed hands or face, the once blithe and pretty Laura Lou. The hideous being who was her mate continued in the same odd fluctuations of fury, grief, and merriment, and whenever she uttered a groan, he parodied it with another, as Mother Clark thought, in saturnine derision. At length he strode into another room and banged the door after him. In due time the poor woman's pains were over, and a daughter was born. Such an imp, with long pointed ears, flat nose, and enormous restless eyes and mouth. It instantly began to yell and talk in some unknown language, at the noise of which the father looked into the room, and told the sage femme that she should not go unrewarded. The sick woman seized the moment of his absence to say in the ear of Mulcark, "If ye not been at ill work tonight, he could not have fetched ye. Take no more now than your rightful fee, or he'll keep ye here." At this moment he returned with a bag of gold and silver coins, which he emptied on the table, and told her to help herself. She took 4 shillings, which was her primitive fee, neither more nor less, and all his urgency could not prevail with her to take a farthing more. He looked so terrible at her refusal that she rushed out of the house. He ran after her. "You'll take your money with you!" he roared, snatching up the bag, still half full, and flung it after her. It lighted on her shoulders, and partly from the blow, partly from terror, she fell to the ground, and when she came to herself, it was morning, and she was lying across her own doorstone. It is said that she never more told fortune, or practised spells, and though all that happened 60 years ago and more, Laura Silver Bell, wise folk think, is still living, and will so continue to the day of doom, among the fairies. Thank you for listening to the Darkest Page podcast. I have been your host, and I wish you pleasant dreams.